Hi, all, and welcome to the Found Artist Files, the podcast that delves into real stories that inspire, uplift, and remind you that no matter who you are, your story matters. Every journey, no matter how big or how small, is worth celebrating. Here, we'll explore the powerful narratives of everyday people, artists, creators, and dreamers just like you, sharing the struggles, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way. So keep going, keep creating, and remember, you're crafting your own unique path, one story at a time. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. This week we have Lily Lady with us. Hi, Lily.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Would love to just start off and learn a little bit more about, what it is that you do, who you are, and what journey that you have in the film industry.
Totally. For shorthand, I guess I'd say I'm a multi-disciplinary artist, whatever that means. Multi-hyphenate, blah, 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 blah person, one of many. I guess I started in my creative practice primarily in the space of poetry and writing and performing poetry. Then I got involved in more visual mediums, and now I'm kind of toggling between the written word and the screen and enjoying every step of the process.
Awesome. So I know that, before starting on all these journeys that you initially pursued a different path than the one that you're currently on right now. Mm-hmm. So one that was focusing on more, global politics and systems. Was there ever a defining moment that made you be like, okay, hold on, this is not what I want, but let me switch courses and go back to something that you did grow up around or something that was always really inside of you?
Yeah, I mean, I was raised by two writers, and so I was in a house filled with books and filled with, people whose idea of time together, quality time as a family, is we're all in the same room, just reading separate things. And so I had this really cozy, really literary upbringing. And, my parents met as journalists and then became freelance authors. From a young age, I saw the feast or famine lifestyle hit really hard in terms of just their ability to support the family. And, my parents gave me everything. They're obsessed with me. They worship the ground I walk in. I have great parents. They rock. But, if you're trying to make a buck as a writer in the 1980s, it's very different from trying to make a buck as a writer with two kids in the early 2000s. And so even within the span of my formative years, I saw them struggle financially, despite really doing their best by virtue of the publishing industry, essentially. And so I had a lot of, early creative instincts that I'm more channeled into the world of academia because I saw it as a safer bet just to kind of cover my expenses as an adult, essentially. And from a genuine place as well, I really enjoyed school. I once I was, out of the high school, I hate everything, I'm super depressed mode. In college, I thrived on just reading and studying history. I was really, really engaged. I had some very formidable professors. And then I went to grad school right after undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I did a master's in global studies. I thought I'd love to be a diplomat at the UN. I want to work in these white-collar NGO spaces. I'll wear a blazer. It'll be so chic. And only a little bit kind of neo-colonial. But then, during the pandemic, I guess to answer your question, the kind of turning point was really the pandemic, when I think a lot of there was kind of this seeing behind the veil of a lot of traditional life benchmarks at that moment for many people, I think, and also for me, which was, a life is about this age you have your career, and at this age you settle down, and at this age you get your 401k, and it just, everything was upside down. Right was left, backwards was forwards. And if there's not a time to recalibrate to what actually brings you joy, when is that time? So I really pivoted to writing around then, and I haven't got the calling to go back into more traditional spaces since.
Yeah, and I think that, we always get, as a society, right, we get so stuck up on a timeline where I think that that's just sort of passed down from generation to generation, that you should have X achieved or success by whatever success is for that milestone, right? It should be college, then it should be, and it's a timeline. But as like your point that you said that, when COVID hit, like it really gave society just a moment to be like, okay, we all need to just sit with ourselves and just sort of feel. And I think like that was scary for some people, but it seems like it was sort of a very transformative feel for you. How did that period really, you know, ultimately, what was the feeling for you during that moment?
Sure. I was working post grad. I finished grad school over Zoom and got this job at AmeriCorps. And so I was working domestically through AmeriCorps, and I was so miserable. I just think in general, when something is not right, there's no momentum for it to happen. Um, and I
Yeah,
mean
you have
that
to
to say,
force it.
yeah, you have to force it. And so I was working at this kind of, very ostensibly charitable, which is a loaded term, organization where I was, my, the AmeriCorps assignment was this direct outreach hunger program based in New York City. And I think that I was just witnessing a lot of contract violation and labor exploitation in the workplace for this means to an end mentality of, well, if we're really trying to solve hunger in a global crisis moment, so for the most at-risk New Yorkers, so that means that you have to do XYZ and run over here and run over there, and there's no PPE, and this isn't necessarily, certain things you're doing aren't what you signed up for. And I was just feeling that I was within this system that just was not working for me. And so I tried to unionize AmeriCorps, which is such a David and Goliath moment that I quickly abandoned because, again, there was just no momentum. I do think that an AmeriCorps union is really an intellectual exercise that interests me. However, it was not something I had the tools or resources to really get off the ground once I quit, especially, and I was no longer under contract. I was trying to collectively organize just in this WhatsApp thread with all other people that were still in AmeriCorps, and there's not a whole lot of incentive for people who are essentially temporary workers. You have a contract of maybe 1 year to put their neck out in that kind of space. And so while I was trying to do that, I was feeling very I was just questioning everything, and I was feeling as though what I should be doing should feel more pleasurable, should feel more easy, should feel more natural. And I have all these inclinations and inspirations towards connection, because what I was really wanting to do was connect. I want to connect with people at the end of the day. And I thought that AmeriCorps could be a machine or a vehicle in which to do so, and instead it felt very isolating. And so I looked towards this writing group that I found on Zoom, and it was all people based in New York, but of course, because we were pretty much under lockdown still, we were just meeting um, on the internet. And so I got really involved with the people in this writing group, and we would credit each other's work, and eventually when some pandemic restrictions lifted, we would meet up in person and share work. And then there were these readings at KGB Bar and other places around the city that became like connective tissue, just for me in a social space that felt really gratifying. And it, yeah, it's different than my path towards being a diplomat, etc. And it doesn't feel all that different holistically, because I think that what I was seeking and what I was receiving was, wanting to be part of a community essentially. And that I think in artistic spaces is a really gratifying feeling.
Yeah, and I think that you just basically covered exactly what this podcast is about, right? Is that no journey is the right way, that every journey looks different. And so you found a path that does feel in alignment with you. And so it's wonderful that you were able to find this community and be able to start, writing a little bit more and finding that more of that sort of inner compass, right? So what does your writing process look like now? And how has it evolved from the start in the group to how it is today?
Yeah, I mean, I was primarily writing poetry in that workshop and continue to do so. Right now, I'm writing for Dirty Magazine, so I'm on the staff there as a journalist, and so I get assignments from the editor in chief, Ripley Soprano, to go interview people. And then, so I'll kind of go around LA. I'll find these really cool, interesting people, interview them. I'll get the transcript back, and I'll kind of try to go through what it was like to be there with them and get that down onto the page. So that's a little different than the kind of ideating and living and experiencing that transmutes into poetry. But it's all part of the one practice, which is to say that the writing for me is not dissimilar just from the living or being out in the world. I think that sometimes people have asked me in the past about what does writer's block look like for you, or what do you do when you have a writer's block? And my answer is always just stop. Just if it seems as though there's resistance on the page, go outside, go walk outside and, talk to someone in a cafe or go to a park and look at a squirrel. That's just as much writing as you're doing just staring at a Google Drive document. In fact, it's probably more because you're having an experience that you can then translate. And so I think the writing process is just from a natural flow state of experience than transcription, essentially. I think the words, I of the best writers, the writers I'm drawn to, the words are just kind of a very translucent veil of water that are the access to the story. And so, developing that kind of ideal light touch of craft is somewhat labor intensive, but also I want it to feel as easy as I want writing to feel, which is just about just being a vessel for the story. And so yeah, the practice is every day I try to write, and I definitely don't write for many hours a day. I'm not toiling. I really admire people that say, okay, I wake up at 6 a.m., I brew my coffee, I write from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Those are my hours. It's just, that's not as natural for me, but I really do admire it. I think that rocks if it works for you.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you say that because and I want to say that it was Stephen King that I just saw an article about saying that he writes no matter what, always writes 2,000 words a day. And I'm like, to have that routine and have that discipline is amazing. But there's also a part of people who are like, I need to also have that downtime, that away time from a screen or from the exercise because you're not flowing. So your nervous system is actually blocking from the flow, from the creativity, from the insights and the intuition that you want to be able to share and create. And so I think that there's no right or wrong way for being able to get into a process. But, for you and having this creative process that you've kind of taken on that works for you, are there parts of your identity that you've discovered or embraced more fully through your writing, or you also direct as well, or through your directing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I love Stephen King. I think he's fabulous. Are there parts of my identity that I've embraced through writing or directing? I think, and it's actually not dissimilar from what I like so much about Stephen King's career, because he had this major car accident and also where he almost died in Maine. And he wrote this incredible New Yorker piece about basically learning to walk again and be a person again, essentially. And he also, I think, halfway through or at some point in his career, got sober. And he writes about how, yeah, there were whole books that he wrote just totally drunk on blow, he's just trashed, and now he's sober. And that's, for me, really fascinating, because he still has the same practice, he still has the same craft, and he's a totally different person. And approaching the page as a sober writer is something really specific. um, and sobriety in general is a project that requires a lot of honesty. And so I think maybe not so much parts of my identity that I've found, but the part of my identity that I want to water, if it's a plant, is this kind of honest experience. And I'm a sober person. I really value, emotional sobriety and being an honest person as much as I possibly can. And I think some of the best writing comes from that place of humility. And it's not a place that comes naturally to me. It's something that I have to stretch to and strive at. Um, and so in order to, say, direct a movie, or direct a short film, or something of that nature, I think a person doesn't have to, but often really has to get 100 with themselves of, why do I want to do this? What do I want to bring of myself to the world? And that's kind of a vulnerable, and it's almost like you're exposing yourself, and you want to expose parts of yourself that are proud of. And so I think, writing and being a creative person to whatever degree I am, I would like to say it helps me holistically kind of be an honest person.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something so, from an artist standpoint, being able to create in both of those different spaces, whether you are sober or not, it's just like still being able to show up as the artist that you want to is still something that's within you, right? So it's amazing that well, one that even resonated in that you do love Stephen King, and that sort of kind of flow and everything. But what does it mean for you to make something that is emotionally honest?
I think it means somewhere along the process of arrival, there has to be an ego death, which is to say, the posturing and the, you know, performative element can be a decoration, can be a charm on the bracelet, but it can't be the kernel that the piece comes from. Which is I hear it sounding a bit abstract, but I suppose, just to dilute it, it's about making something emotionally honest is about moving slow enough to know exactly how you're feeling in the moment of creation, and then taking that and elevating it to a place of art.
I mean, ego death is probably the best way that I can put it, especially because when you are creating it, and that's the thing, is that, when just people who are watching the art start to criticize the the human beings that are playing in the art, or that are taking part of the art, they don't realize that this art is coming from someone's vulnerable state. It's coming from somewhere that someone else is also being like, let me open up and share this parts of me that I think will be able to connect and unite others. And so just as an artist, to be able to be like, I want to create something but share a part of me that ultimately could open up criticism, could open up unkindness, right, from others. But from your standpoint, it seems like it plays a really big part in your art. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about what role does vulnerability play in the way that you do approach your art.
Yeah, I think it's everything, because I think that creating something vulnerable is a really earnest endeavor. And I'm all about earnestness and new genuine movement stuff, which is kind of diametrically opposed to cynicism and things that are a little bit more flippant in that direction. Even as a consumer of things, if I'll go to a play or a reading or, watch a student film or something, even if the even if the project doesn't work for me, or I think it's flawed, or it's not what's up for me, it's I think that well, I enjoy engaging with criticism and literary and artistic criticism. It At the end of the day, it's just hard to make something, and it's really a gift when someone takes something of themselves and brings it to an audience. And as a recipient of that gift, if I'm in a theater, or if I'm at a reading, that's kind of a holy and somewhat divine, elevated transaction to be on the other side of. And so it's so nice when someone shares their work, even if it's something you think, I'm not really into that. Um, Especially if someone's sharing it from a place of vulnerability. And I think as an audience member, on the other side of that as well, I think if I get a whiff of someone's kind of taking the audience for granted, or just, feeling as though having this kind of maybe more ego-filled masturbatory endeavor of just everything I say should just be, written down by a scribe. There are readings like that too on the circuit you go to, and you think, oh, it's such a gift that the audience is giving back to give their attention. That exchange is the artist is often being vulnerable by saying, here's something I made, what do you think? And the audience is saying, wow, I'm going to give you some of my day to consume what you got going on. On both ends of the exchange, that's vulnerable, and that's also, an important exchange. And I think it's nice when there's a mutual understanding of what's at stake.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. So I was watching something like an interview from Prince the other day, and he was saying that the most vulnerable thing that an artist can do is make art for themselves. And so that is like goes back to like what you were saying, is like telling the stories that really do come from you, that are vulnerable for you, but like that matter to you, are so important to create, because if they matter to you, they matter for others. And so even talking about, and before you hopped on, and this week, obviously with Sinners being released, like we talked a lot about that. And that was even, Ryan was saying, and like some of the inspiration for him was some of his ancestors, obviously, and sort of the background and things like that. So it's still, you're creating something that is allowing people to come in, but to also be able to learn something, or be able to also align to something that they didn't know that they could align to as well. By you being vulnerable, it also allows others, like you said, to be vulnerable. And so speaking at both ends of like the creator and the audience, like how do you perceive performance in your everyday life? Like, is there a difference between how you perform in the world versus how you also create?
That's an interesting question. I think maybe to a fault, no. I talked to my therapist one time, and I was saying, Anjali, I just wish that my DP was in the corner of the room when I was having this experience last week, but then I just embodied him, and I thought, I'm just gonna start seeing this through the camera. And often I'll just, walk around. It's more fun that way, walk around and interact with people and pretend that you're this whatever Super 8 you want to be shooting on, you name it. It's cheaper too. You don't have to do a camera rental. I think that the experiences that I want to be having every day, and the state that I want to be in, is just in awe of how cinematic everything is. And when you tune into that frequency, walking down the street or going to the gym or going to the grocery store can be really cinematic. And then when you pass people, they're cast members in your play or your film, and that's also extremely cinematic, and it takes on this weight and heaviness that's really fun space to play in. So there's not a whole lot of, I mean, of course, I have super pedestrian, filling out forms days, but it's fun to elevate things playfully into a realm of performance. And yeah, that can be done. I was watching this film the other day at this micro cinema Vidiot's in LA, and the film was called Secret Mall Apartment, and it's about this collective of artists in Provincetown, Rhode Island, who basically start squatting in this room in a mall in Rhode Island. And they build it out into a living room, and they sneak in every day, and they sneak in cinder blocks, so they build their own wall and entrance and exit, and it became this kind of prolonged, essentially, I guess you could say, performance piece, but they were really just hanging out together. And yeah, you can analyze it to, it's a commentary on capitalism, and it's a commentary on public space and gentrification and, commodification. Um, but, when the person who was the head of the collective essentially is talking about what it meant to him, he's saying, I don't know why, I just had a calling. I just had to make the Secret Mall Apartment, and it was not separate from my everyday life. It was just what I had to do. And I thought that was really resonant and just kind of a nice way to explain just the necessity for living in that mode.
Yeah, and living in the moment, being present, right? It's also like the saying where it's like be your own main character. Like you are the main character of your life. So it's like what do you want your main character to do right now or to be right now? Who do you want to be in this scene, right? So it's like walking by someone, you're like, they didn't even know that I casted them in this scene, but here they are, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's a way to be a benign megalomaniac.
but it's so fun to even live that way, right? So it's also being appreciative that you're like, I get to do this. I get to be here. And so I mean, that's awesome that they had a calling, and it's also like from an art standpoint, someone could be creating something, and then someone else could be perceiving it, like you said, in so many different ways, right? There's so many different ways that someone can look at an art and how it can. It's even in conversations, just being in a conversation or being present with two different people, like. We both have our own perception of what is going on at the moment, but that doesn't mean that you should stop wanting to create if you feel that calling to be like, hey, this is a story I want to tell, or this is a movie that I want to really be able to even, be a part of or help create. So, do you find in your life or that your life in general really informs your writing and directing, or does it help you make sense of your life?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think, you write what you know, and that often in its initial era is somewhat of a literal take on one's life. There's a lot of, early autofiction out circling the internet, I'm sure, of things that I just stumbled upon and then wrote down on the page. And then it can be further abstracted, and I'm interested in writing projects now that maybe don't have to do with my direct lived experience, and seeing what that process is like. And I think the journalism helps that, helps, you know work that muscle a little bit, because I'm really stepping into other people's worlds for an hour or 2 hours or however long they give me for the interview, and I get to really kind of experience what their viewpoint is, which is another very divine and somewhat holy exchange. Um, but yeah, I think, pulling from the day to day and one's own life is always a rich mine to, you know, transmute their own art into. But I also think, POV is not the end all be all. I love projects that are written by people who um, are writing about, even fiction, books that are written by people who are totally different than their subjects always fascinate me, and movies that are so abstracted you think how could anyone pull this out of their brain? This is just such a whole world. It feels like a dream where it's just all the kind of rules and norms of a dream are just existing in this movie. I get down with that stuff a lot. I really admire writers and artists that make things in that vein. So yeah, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to see both sides and to see art that does go on both sides, and it's just like leaving a film and being like how, like where did that even come from? How did you even come up with that? And it's also like the best feeling to be able to be like that. Also, as an artist, like that makes me want to be better when I see something that is so insanely like creative, or just uh yeah, to come from a different world, from someone's imagination and from inside someone else. It helps me as an artist want to be like, how can I not be afraid to tap into that, or be able to be afraid to even want to try doing something that does not feel so comfortable to me. And so for you, as you're creating, whether it's, from your own experience or something new, what do you really hope that people are feeling when they do experience your work?
Yeah, I think that I hope that people are feeling a sense that of I mean macro level, depending on the work, but I hope that people feel inspired to make their own stuff. I think the pie is infinite. It's not, there's no scarcity when it comes to creation and attention. And so I think the only way to believe or feel like something is impossible is to keep saying, oh, it's so hard to make this type of thing, or how am I possibly going to raise this amount of money? You're farther away than ever when you start talking like that. And so I think that people who maybe engage with anything that I've done or been a part of feel like, well, what's their, pocket of creation that they want to get down with, whether it's building a miniature. I never made a miniature, but maybe they read a poem and then they think, you know what, I gotta go to Michael's right now, I'm gonna make a miniature universe. And just to feel excited about that would be such a cool, it would be cool for me to be a node on their individual timeline of any of that, because there's nothing better than the feeling. I mean, how intoxicating is the feeling of at the start of a project where you just get the idea and you think, oh my gosh, I have to do this or else I'm going to explode. I mean, it's the best feeling ever.
It is, yeah. I'm laughing because you were just saying, like, talking about like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this, and I'm actually in the midst of reading this book, and it's called The Game of Life and How to Play It, and it talks a lot about saying, like, if you have that mindset, that scarcity mindset, that negative mindset, like, then you're never going to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. Michael Jackson used to get this when he had an idea. He was like, I have to have this idea, and he had to tell his manager because he was like, I don't want this idea going to someone else. So when you have this idea that comes in, and it's a calling, and it's ultimately like, this is your story to tell. So don't be afraid. Don't let any negative news or just like the fact that it hasn't been done yet stop you from continuing to do it. And, fear obviously comes up a lot, and that's something that people need to learn or face and welcome and be comfortable with. So you verbalize like that you've had common fears like among your creative journey. And if so, especially like when you're just like starting out on a project or anything like that, but how has your relationship with fear evolved, whether in life or art or just like stepping into new spaces?
Yeah, I'm doing this play right now with my buddy Sienna, and I'd never done theater before. It's a 3-act play, and we're both in it, and it's mainly just there's a cast, and we're kind of the center folds in the play. And the first time we did a run of it in LA, I just thought I remember the whole week before I couldn't sleep. I was so in my head, and I was having all these irrational thoughts about what if Sienna breaks her arm and I break my leg the day before, and it's just spinning out, you know? And then I thought, okay, this is actually, instead of believing the thoughts I'm having, what if I look at it like I'm really glad I'm having these thoughts, because if the stakes weren't so high, it wouldn't be the most important thing that I need to do right now. I think the fear is the tool of, it's the indicator that, you're excited about the project, and it's really great. So now I think if I don't feel like I'm going to shit my pants before doing anything, maybe the stakes aren't high enough, And yeah, it doesn't have to be like that for every poem. I mean, that's just a recipe for having, serious gastrointestinal problems. But, for big projects and big undertakings, it's great to feel as though there's some kind of a life or death involved in making it. And because then to see the fallacy of that, where, nothing so serious is really going on, you can reality check to that extent, but also feel the intoxicating feeling, which is the immediacy of wow, I feel called to make this. And the stakes are high, but that's such a thrill.
Yeah, but it's also like when you fear something, like that is the number one indicator to run towards it. And so many people face and they turn away. But if you run towards it and you face it, like the growth, the challenges, what's on the other side is just absolutely amazing for just your internal self, right? And it's to be like, I didn't like if I looked back, I would never have been able to do that, but it's within you that is stopping you. So it's like continuing to move forward and continuing to not run away when fear approaches you, when you want something so badly, because that's ultimately the beauty of it, is that there's a reason why this fear is coming up. It's because you do truly, truly want it. And if you didn't want it, you wouldn't fear it.
Right, and yeah, exactly. And that's often where the growth happens. There was this moment where a couple years ago, I booked this trip to Berlin, and I was just going to go by myself. I was going to stay with someone that I met on the internet who was a friend of mine, and I'd never really traveled by myself before. I'd never been to Berlin. I didn't really know why I was going or what I was going to do when I got there. And I remember the night before my flight, I was so scared. I just felt really nervous. I felt like a kid going to sleepaway camp, and I didn't know if I wanted to go anymore. And I woke up with this sense of just kind of dread and stickiness around the trip, and I felt really anxious. And then I got this email that said, oh, there was a fire in your terminal in JFK, and your trip is rescheduled in 24 hours. So you have to wait another day to go. And my initial feeling was disappointment. And that was such an indicator that, oh, I really want to go. And what I'm feeling is just excitement. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling like a kid at sleepaway camp because I'm really excited. The anxiety and the fear is just kind of perverted senses of just pure excitement. And so the indicator was, oh, bummer, my flight's not going to be till tomorrow. And so I had this opportunity of 24 hours to just get my mind right around the idea of excitement. And so by that kind of getting ready to get ready, by the time I got on the flight, I was feeling really aligned with my sense of excitement. And so yeah, often fear is just kind of masqueraded other feelings.
I love that, because it's also like being able to understand the difference between fear and excitement, because fear comes in, anxiety comes in, and we pay so much attention to that we forget about all of the other reasons why we're here. And it's when you just take a moment and you're just like, all right, let me just like take a deep breath, let me just realign and be like, why am I here? Is this what I want? And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, I'm checking back in with me. The excitement is really why I'm here. I just let the fear and the anxiety mask it. That, if that happens, then you don't ever get to really experience what that excitement is truly allowing for you to be able to express. And so for you, like, you've obviously had fear, you had anxiety. So like, what are some things that you've experienced that once felt impossible?
Yeah, I think the first film we shot in, I guess, 2022. And I hadn't worked in that medium ever before. So I really didn't know what it was going to be like. And it felt like this big abyss that I was just throwing a lot of energy and resources into, in the hopes that this vision that I have in my brain can be translated into something approximating a feature film. And so that might have felt impossible by virtue of all the mysteries inherent to making a film when you don't really know anything about film, which I didn't and still don't in many ways. And now looking back on that, I think that was the biggest superpower of the project of Sam's World, which was my naivete about what it was going to be like. Because I think if I had known more, or if I had even had more of a kind of professional understanding of the mechanisms of, a set, or what every single person on the set does, what everyone's role is, I might have felt a sense of defeat that I got to bypass, but by not knowing how challenging it can be to make a film. And now I'm in a similar situation with my sophomore feature, which I'm trying to get off the ground at the moment, where, if the resources were there, we could shoot it tomorrow. I have the team, I have the, it's ready to go. I'm chomping at the bit. And I think the money involved, this budget was broken down by a line producer, and it's a really major step up from the budget of the first one. It feels like a really vast amount of cash to wrap my hands around. And then again, I'm trying to reality check and think, well, if I focus on how much money needs to come my way before we can, start the camera, then it's just going to feel like a hell of a lot of money. Instead, if I focus on it as an inevitability of course we're going to get the money, of course it's just going to happen, because money is the easiest thing to get, and the hard thing is the story, or then, I think then it's going to happen faster. But I think right now the biggest impossibility that I'm up against is the feeling around the financial resources related to the next film, which feels like it's just a practical reality of, having to be creative about getting it. But yeah, it definitely, and I'm sure many, many other people have felt similarly about their projects, just that there's something in the way, and it's one person writing a check.
Yeah, and it feels like there's two things that sort of happen, right? So there's one where it's like almost the unknowing of it, and the unknowing of the industry allowed you to create the film that you wanted to create. It's almost like two beautiful things with that, right? There's the one where it's like you don't let the industry stop you from being able to tell the story that you want to create. And then also from your second one, it's trusting in the time, right? Like that when that film is meant to be made, that it will be made. And I go back to the film Carol. So Carol was first written, and then it took 20 years for it to actually be made and be created, just due to not having, whether it was the financial support or the support in general. But when it was its time, was its time. And so, like, what are some spaces that really help you build, or do you truly hope to build yourself or be a part of as you're moving forward?
Yeah, I think when there feels as though you're hitting a wall, or with this film, for example, my next feature, I think if it feels really insurmountable, the money stuff, sometimes it's just important to get off the subject, just to really take a beat and think, all right, this is just gonna this is gonna simmer. I'm gonna put this on the simmer, and I'm gonna start the appetizers, and then the appetizers can be the most delicious part of the meal. I think that getting off the subject and onto other more, maybe you're gonna pick a project that's really immediate, like, oh, I'm gonna do a puppet show instead. Well, you know what doesn't cost $750,000? Puppets in your hands. So I think it's just about creating, if Carol is on the simmer for 20 years, it's going to be a great slow cooker meal. But maybe so that that director doesn't blow their brains out in the interim, maybe they did a lot of stuff. Maybe they traveled, or maybe they started scrapbooking. And so I think it's just important to toggle. The toggle is where the pleasure happens often if things are feeling distinctly unpleasurable. And so
Yeah.
that's initially where, and then you never know where the things go. That's initially, I wanted to do theater because I thought, okay, well, it seems like there's a lot of people that you have to email when you're making a film, and a lot of them don't have anything to do with the film. There's this person who runs this grant application, and that's probably going to go nowhere, and then you have to email this person because maybe you got to take them out to a dinner and judge them up for 10K. I thought, okay, I really don't want to open my email. Maybe I'll just make this play with my friend. And then the play became, over the course of my year, one of the main projects that I've done and the main accomplishments that I've felt proud of is this play. And it's really taken on a life of its own. We did it twice in LA, once in a gallery and once in a private residence. We brought it to New York. We did it in, for a much bigger audience than we've ever done it before. We're going to go to Toronto with it next month. It's really taking me into a space and a zone creatively that I never imagined from the outset when I thought, oh, I want to do something to distract myself. I feel so excited about the play. I feel so excited about the project of theater. I feel so excited about kind of the existential theory of theater where it's immediate and it's one time, and we don't have plans to make it into a film or even have anyone photograph or document it necessarily.
Yeah, and you just never know either, right? Like what you could buy something that you're like, "Oh, let me take this other thing to distract myself." It could be the thing that ultimately you have been looking for, that you've been waiting for, that you thought that you not saying that you don't love the first thing, but you'd be like, wait, but I really loved this. And so you're opening yourself up to continuously learning. And I think that's so, so important, especially as a creative, especially as an artist, especially as a human being, right? We want to always continue to be learning, especially as we're evolving and as we're growing. I think that's so important. And, you've had such a wonderful journey so far. And so would love to learn, from the start, from the beginning, can you just share more of like one pivotal moment from your childhood that really influenced your path?
Oh, that's such a good question. Now's the time to say I don't remember anything from my childhood. And that's something I have to unpack with my therapist, Anjali. No, I remember some things. There were some cool moments. Um, I think, and to round out the Berlin of it all and the flight and the fear and the not knowing. I remember in middle school, there was this camp that was mandated camp right outside. I grew up in New York City, and so, you take a bus with your classmates and go to this camp for a couple days. And it was called Camp Greenkill. I'll never forget. And we got there, and it's just, you're doing archery or, having dinner in the mess hall. And it's just lots of activities with the people that you go to school with, lots of known quantities, nothing too serious going on. And as soon as I got there, I just flipped out. And I went to the nurse's office sobbing, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot stay another minute here. I just was so nervous as a child. I was so scared. I was so afraid of new environments, and I missed my mom. And I just could not hack it. And I looked at all the kids just going along to get along, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. They're just making their macrame bracelets and tie-dyeing their t-shirts, and that's so far away from my experience. And eventually I convinced the nurse to call my dad, he rented a car to come pick me up that night. And it just that's kind of a was a it wasn't a one-off, let's say, for my childhood, that just extreme sense of panic and then needing to retreat to a safety zone. And so now I feel like actually all aspects of that experience are they are what they are. I still feel sometimes challenged by new environments. I still feel kind of separate from my environment many times, which what is that if not the state of being a journalist, being a bit of an outsider and going into these spaces and looking and watching and documenting. I'm not crying anymore about it, but the sense of kind of separateness from my peers is now something that I can use to to be on the ground and documenting things. The sense of fear and anxiety, probably then I was just really excited and I wanted to just hang out with, the cool kids on the swing set. Now I can more readily identify what those feelings are and use them to, as part of my practice and moving towards rather than away, as you said before. And so, yeah, I guess that was kind of a formative time, and I don't know why that one came to my mind at the moment, but I think often I encounter people that, or in the past I've encountered people that I recount something about my childhood just being very anxious and very nervous kid, and they say, oh, you seem so, you just kind of have this alternative life and you don't really care and you just live in non-traditional ways. That seems so surprising to hear. And I think, yeah, I don't know, I guess so. That's cool and gratifying to hear from an outside perspective. In many ways, I still feel like that kid at camp, just kind of scared of my surroundings. But realizing that, I am and I am not, and then moving it all into a place of offerings and creation and art is really where it's at.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Thanks for being you. And to everyone at home, always be you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for listening. Did you enjoy this week's journey? So do we. And don't forget to give us a follow on all of our other socials at NextFoundArtist. Also, head on over to our website, nextfoundartist.com, to find and watch independent films from your next favorite artist.